All right, let's talk about this. Number one, name 3 points that are collinear. There were 3 possible correct right answers here. You could have picked out the 3 points that were on this line right here. So you could have A, H, and B. So that would have been one correct answer there. Or you could have picked out the 3 points that are in the orange plane. So that would be the points that are on this line here. Point F, H, and G. Or you could have picked out the 3 points right here that are on the intersection of those 2 planes. So you could have point D, H, and E. Any of those 3 would have been correct. You only had to have one of those 3 and that would have been fine. Because we wanted them to be collinear on the same line. For number 2, we wanted non-collinear, so not on the same line. I want to make sure that I'm picking out 3 points that I couldn't grab a straight edge and draw one single line and hit all 3 of them. One of the best ways to do this is to pick out points that form a triangle shape, because if they form a triangle shape, I could not possibly use a straight edge and draw one line through them. Yes? You said F, E, and B. So point F, point E, point B. Yes, that would work. That is not the only correct answer here. Does anybody have another one? A, D, and G. A, D, G. Does anybody have another one? A, E, and B. Yes. There's an infinite number, almost. It's not an infinite exactly, but there's a lot of possible answers you could have here. You could have said A, F, and B. You could have had A, F, and G, A, G, and H. You want something that's making a triangle shape as you look at those points. It should not have a drawn line going through all 3 of those. Number 3, we want 5 coplanar points, so 5 points all in the same plane. And they tell me that they all need to be coming from plane M. So plane M, that's the one in blue right here. There are 5 points that are all in this plane that are shown in the figure. Point A is in plane M. Down here, point B is in plane M. And then the other 3 points, I'm going to use my figure here. So if I'm looking at it like this, if I call this plane right here plane M, point A would be like up here, point B would be down here. And then we have 3 points that are right on the intersection of these 2 planes. So these 3 points right here, D, H, and E, those would be on plane M, and they would be on the other plane since they're on the intersection there. So D, H, and E are the other 3 points we're looking for there. That is the only right answer for that one because they only show 5 points on that plane. And then the last one here, number 4, name a point that lies on the intersection of planes M and N. So I'm looking right here at this line where it shows the orange and blue planes intersecting. So you could have answered point D, point H, or point E. Any one of those 3 would have been correct. You only needed one of those. So D, or H, or E. Just one of those would have been correct there. If you had more than one, that's awesome. All right. Please go ahead and put away your warm-up sheet until tomorrow, and go ahead and pull your books out. You should already have those open to page 49. If not, go ahead and turn there now. 49. We're skipping a couple sections in Module 1. We'll still hit all those concepts, but Module 1 was starting to get really long. I wanted to keep this first test kind of short and sweet, keep us focused. So we've talked about points, lines, and planes. We've talked about line segments. We know what it is for line segments to be congruent. We've talked about how to find the length or the distance of a line segment. Today we're going to talk about something called midpoints. Midpoint reminds me of a compound word. Have you guys ever heard of compound words, like in English class? What is a compound word? Anybody know? Two words smashed together to form one word. Midpoint is one of those words. So midpoint, they've shortened the first word. The mid in midpoint stands for middle. So the midpoint is the middle point. And it is exactly halfway between the endpoints. It's not just about halfway, it is exactly in the middle of those two endpoints. So I'm going to draw a little diagram here. I want you guys to add this to your notes. So if I have segment AB, and this point right here, I'm going to call this point M. If this is the midpoint, it is exactly halfway in between points A and B. We would say that it is equidistant. That means it is the same distance. So I would know that segment AM is congruent to segment MB. If point M is my midpoint, then by definition, those segments would be the same length. So I could say that the length of segment AM is equal to the length of segment MB. So if you have not already, please add this much right here to your notes. This is what a midpoint is. The way we find a midpoint, we usually use M for my midpoint, unless they give us another letter that they want us to name that point. Otherwise, we usually default to M. We want the average of the two x values that we have, or if we're on a coordinate plane, I want the average of the x's and the average of the y's. The way we find the average is I take those two x values, I'm going to add them together, and then I'm going to cut it in half. So looking down at that box where it says key concept, I'm going to pop that up just a little bit higher on the screen. Oh, never mind, it's only here. So this right here is my formula for how I find the midpoint. This is when I'm just working on a number line. I want the average of the x's. So we add the x's, and then we cut them in half. You guys ready to practice doing that? Similar to when I'm finding distance, I'm going to have a point 1 and a point 2. It doesn't matter which one I call point 1 and which one I call point 2, because I'm just going to be adding those together. Let's look at example 1. What are the two named points that we're supposed to look at there? X and Z. So let's look at X and Z. What's the number that goes with point X? -3. What's the number that goes with point Z? 8. So I need to take the -3 and the 8 and add them together. It does not matter what order you do that in. So 8 plus -3. Or I want you guys to write this off to the side. You could do -3 plus 8. Does not matter what order you do that in. What is 8 plus -3, or -3 plus 8? 5. So I have 5 when I add those x's, and then I have to cut that in half, so 5 over 2. What is 5 divided by 2? 2.5. So the midpoint of segment XZ is 2.5. Let's go add that to our picture here. So halfway in between 2 and 3, right here is my midpoint. All right. Flip the page for me. Up at the very top of page 50, there's a check problem that is this exact skill practiced one more time. I want you guys to try that one. So top of page 50, there's a problem that says check. I would like you to find the midpoint of segment AF. So here's A. Here's F. I want you to find the midpoint of that. Show me all the work that you're using to do that. Does anybody have an answer that they're comfortable sharing? 1. Talk to me about how to set this up. What would my numerator look like? There's 2 possible right ways that my numerator could look. Yes. 7 plus -5 over 2. Or what's the other possible correct way that you could set this up? -5 plus 7. Either one of those would be correct. No matter which way you set it up, 7 plus -5 or -5 plus 7, what do you get when you simplify that? 2. So we'd have 2 over 2, which simplifies to 1. All right. So far, so good? All right, let's look at a real-world application of this. Example number 2. A pony works at a vintage clothing store. She wants to hang a new sign so that it's centered above the dressing room doors. She wants to find the center or the middle. Given that the dressing room doors have the same width, find the point along the wall that a pony should hang the new sign. So here's the information that they give me. Measuring from the left-hand side of the wall over to the beginning of the first door. So right here. This is 7.5 feet. So my x1 is going to be 7.5. Measuring from the left side of the wall over to the right side of the dressing room doors. That's 13.5 feet or 13.5 feet. So that's my x2. If I want to find the midpoint, what am I doing with the x1 and the x2? Adding those together. What is 7.5 plus 13.5? 21. So I have 21 over 2. What is 21 divided by 2? 10.5. So 21 over 2 or 10.5 feet. So she should hang the sign 10.5 feet from the left side of the wall. There's a check problem down at the bottom of the page. This time we're not looking at hanging a sign in a clothing store. Now we're looking at Jorge. Jorge travels from his school on 38th Street to the library on 62nd Street. He stops halfway there to take a break. What street does Jorge stop to rest? What kinds of things should we be using for our x1 and our x2? Where are those numbers coming from? From our street numbers here. So the school, 38th Street, that's going to be one of the x's. You can call it either x1 or x2. What about the other number? 62nd Street. Here's my other x value. So go ahead and find where the midpoint is, the halfway point on his trip. What street is Jorge stopping at? 50th Street. What'd you guys say we're putting in for x1 again? 38. What are we putting in for x2? 62. It does not matter if you flip those around. Since we're adding them together, we're going to get the same thing either way. What is 38 plus 62? 100 over 2 gives me 50. So he's stopping at 50th Street. So right here. When you look at the picture, does that look reasonable? Does it look like it could be the midpoint? We always want to check our answers for reasonableness. So once you find what the midpoint is, if you go and plot that on the number line or on the XY graph on the coordinate plane, if it looks wildly out of proportion, you would want to go and check your math again. Let's look at how to find the midpoint when we're looking at a coordinate plane where we have x's and y's. So we're on page 51. This is where we're going to stop for today. They've got a whole bunch going on here in this top piece. Here's what I want you guys to focus on, just this part down here. Here's my midpoint formula. For the midpoint formula, this is the average of the x's, and then it's the average for the y's. So just what we were practicing with when we were on a number line, except now we're going to add x1 and x2 together and divide. Then we'll add y1 and y2 together and divide. One of the things I want to point out before we go and actually try this on a practice problem. Distance formula uses x1, x2, y1, y2. When I'm doing the distance formula, I want the difference in my x's, the difference in my y's. So difference for distance formula, we're subtracting. When I want the midpoint, this is the average. To find the average, we add things together and then we divide. You will be given both of the formulas on the test, but I want to make sure that you guys know which is which and a way to remember those. So midpoint, middle, I want the average. Distance, I want the difference, so I'm subtracting. And then they've got a little picture for us here. Notice they have labeled point P, x1, y1, so this is what they're calling point 1. And then they have point Q as x2, y2, so that would be our point 2 here. And then right here is where we get our point M. Sometimes they'll call it something different. If they don't tell you what to call the midpoint, then we're just going to default to M for middle. All right. Example number 3, they've done all the work, but let's follow through because the last thing I'm going to have you guys do for me is the check at the bottom of the page. So let's look at example number 3. We're going to walk through their steps. We're going to try to replicate what they're doing when we get to the check. All right, so we want to find the coordinates of point M, the midpoint. We have point A, -2, 1, so we're going to call this point 1, which means -2 would be my x1, +1 is going to be my y1. And then our second point, point B, we'll call that point 2. So 8 is going to be my x2, 3 is going to be my y2. I want to add my x's together. What was the first x? x1? -2. And I add that to the other x I had. What was x2? 8. So -2 plus 8. What do I get when I add -2 and 8 together? +6. And 6 cut in half. 6 divided by 2? 3. So the x part of the midpoint is 3. Then we're going to do the same thing with the y's. I'm going to add my y's together. What is y1? 1. What is y2? 3. I add 1 and 3 together to get my numerator. 1 plus 3 gives me 4. And 4 cut in half is 2. So the midpoint there is 3, 2. Oh, thank you. I want you guys to try the check at the bottom of the page. This is the last thing that we're doing. Take about 2 minutes to find the midpoint, which they are calling point B. Oh, sorry. Does anybody have an answer that they're comfortable sharing for the midpoint, point B? Yes, Levi. Yep, say the x and the y. 1 and 4, that is correct. So let's talk about how we got that. What was the x1 that we're putting in? -3. What was x2? 5. What do you get when you add -3 and 5 together? So we have 2 over 2. And then what is our y1? So I have -2 and y2, 10. -2 plus 10 would give me what? 8 over 2. So 2 over 2 gives me 1. 8 over 2 gives me 4. Nice work. Last homework assignment of this module. It's going to be due on Wednesday. It's pages 55 to 57. Up until now, the homeworks have been 12 questions long. This one's just one problem longer. So 13 problems that are due on Wednesday. You with me, dear? Pages 55 to 57, 247, 2630, 3435, 40, 42, 46, 53, 54, and 56. One more reminder that I want to put in front of you guys, just as a reminder. I talked about this at the beginning of the semester when we got together. I talked about this when your first homework was due. As long as you have all your homeworks turned in before I hand you the test, so give it to me on Friday or before Friday, but I have to have it in my hand before I hand you a test. As long as I have all those homeworks, whether they're late, whether you've gotten full credit on them or not, if you then pass the test, so a 60% or above, all of those homeworks will go up to 100%. They'll go up to perfects. So even if you've submitted homework late, even if you haven't gotten full credit on any of the homeworks, if I have them before the test and you pass the test, a 60% or higher, all those homework scores will go up to 100%. Right? Do you guys have any questions for me? Like I said, homework's due on Wednesday. Tomorrow, we'll finish out the very last bit that we need to cover in Module 1. And then at the end of class, I'll pass out your test review because we're going to spend Wednesday in class and Thursday in class reviewing for the test. So I want to get the review in your hands before we actually get to the class day when we're going to be reviewing. If you don't start on it until Wednesday in class, that's okay, but some people like to work ahead, so I'm going to get it in your hands then. Wednesday and Thursday, we'll do some review activities. I'll take questions off the review. I do collect and grade the test reviews for completion. I will post my answer keys for those up on Canvas, so you'll have access to all the answers. And then on Friday when you come in, again, before I hand you a test, you will turn in your review to the tray, and I will grade that for completion. All right? Any questions at all about how the rest of this week is going to work? Fantastic. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.